Stadiums are dumb, and I love them. Let's take a field trip to an actual stadium. What you're looking at right now is the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It is the home of the NBA's Philadelphia 76ers and the NHL's Philadelphia Flyers. It was opened in 1996 after the prior arena, called the Spectrum, no longer served usefulness to the 76ers and Flyers ownership, as they both wanted a bigger arena. The ownership group that owned the Flyers during this time was called Spectacor, and the person that was the head of this group was a man named Ed Snyder. He was a businessman that hopped on the opportunity that Philadelphia was going to be awarded an NHL franchise. In order to secure a deal to acquire the franchise rights to create the Flyers, Snyder mortgaged his own house and put it up as collateral. Upon hearing this news, the Spectrum was built with the help of business partners, and the Flyers began playing there in 1967. Through several business acquisitions, Snyder became the founder of the Flyers and soon after, eventually the arena they played in. Now, up in Syracuse, New York, there was an NBA team called the Syracuse Nationals that existed from 1946 to 1963. They did find success as they won the NBA Finals in 1955. They were bought out by a new ownership group who moved the team to Philadelphia and would be rebranded as the 76ers to pay homage to the Declaration of Independence being signed in Philadelphia on July 4th, 1776, and giving birth to a new nation. This was done because in the year prior, 1962, the Philadelphia Warriors, who featured the great Wilt Chamberlain, were relocated to San Francisco to carry on as the franchise currently known as the Golden State Warriors. To fill that empty void that Philadelphia had for professional basketball, the Nationals relocated from Syracuse to Philly. But in case you were paying attention to the years, the Spectrum wasn't completed yet. For 4 seasons, the 76ers would have their home games at 2 separate arenas. The Philadelphia Convention Hall in Civic Center, which was located in the University City section of Philly, as well as the Philadelphia Arena, which was located in West Philly. The Warriors would split their time between these 2 arenas during their tenure in Philadelphia as well. That only raises even more questions for me, but it is essentially history at this point. I can only analyze and theorize. When the Spectrum's construction was completed, the 76ers moved their home games in that arena. For the majority of the 76ers' time in the Spectrum, they were owned by Harold Katz. Katz was paying Snyder and Spectacor money to play their home games in the Spectrum because Katz was operating independently from Spectacor and had no ownership stakes in the arena that the 76ers played in. Now, remember this piece of information later because it's very important. Then, when this new arena, the Core State Center, aka the First Union Center, aka the Wachovia Center, aka the currently officially named Wells Fargo Center, and aka what the 76ers ownership and social media team currently refers to as the Center, I promise I'll get to that last one later too, was opened in 1996. Ed Snyder was selling a lot of his assets to include Spectacor. He sold 63% of his share of Spectacor to Comcast. Due to this acquisition and Comcast having majority ownership now, the company was rebranded as Comcast Spectacor. After that acquisition, Comcast Spectacor turned around and bought the 76ers from Harold Katz. This means that Comcast Spectacor owns the 76ers, the Flyers, and the arena they played in at the same time, and that is awesome. So that's it. The 76ers have finally solved their lease problems and do not have to pay anyone any money to play their home games in an arena ever again. Everything is going to be A-OK.
And our new managing owner of the Philadelphia 76ers, Joshua Harris, who will be speaking first.
Yeah, so that guy right there is billionaire Joshua Harris. He purchased the 76ers from Comcast Spectacor in 2011, and guess what? Uh-oh, I guess we gotta start paying rent again. So in that acquisition deal, the 76ers signed a 20-year lease with Comcast Spectacor to continue playing their home games at the Wells Fargo Center until that deal expires in 2031. Now remember earlier how I talked about the name The Center? Yeah, so Wells Fargo's name is on the building they play in, but the 76ers refuse to acknowledge their existence because they are not a sponsor of the 76ers. And on the 76ers official Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the Wells Fargo Center is always referred to as the Center. This is why I love stadiums. The business and bureaucracy behind these arenas are so stupid, and I wouldn't have it any other way, just so I could sit in a stadium with a nice view. I mean, have you ever been to Camden Yards in Baltimore? It's beautiful. I mean, I used to marvel at the size of these buildings, and seeing games played out in person, which I had always seen on my television or through a video game, was such a novelty that I look forward to it every single time. I'm a 30-year-old man, and I still get giddy seeing games in person. Me and my dad would come here over the years, the majority of them during the Iverson administration. Those games were a real treat, since Iverson was my favorite athlete growing up. We would witness Iverson attempt to carry this team for many years to a championship, but unfortunately fall short in the process. But hey, the great times weren't only had by Iverson or the home team at the Wells Fargo Center. On January 25th, 2020, LeBron James moved to third place on the NBA's all-time scoring list, passing Lower Merion native Kobe Bryant. LeBron received a standing ovation from the home crowd. Now, I wish I could end it right there, but as we all know, 2020 was a bad year for all of us.
Breaking news in this Sunday afternoon, five-time NBA champion, former league MVP Kobe Bryant died earlier this afternoon.
LeBron's feat happening on the same court and the events that played out the day after one of professional sports' most iconic athletes was taken away from us only holds his place in much higher regard. I'm not just saying that because I'm a Philadelphia sports fan. As I get older and revisit places from my past, I'm much bigger. I take up more space now than I ever did as a child because I've been able to have an impact on different people in my personal life over the years. Kobe took up more space than I could even imagine. As does Iverson, Joel Embiid, Eric Lindros, or Claude Giroux, along with the many opponents who set foot in this palace and created memories of their own. But in order to properly store these memories, you need a good photo album. I love this monolith of a building where greatness is hung from the rafters. I love this arena and the story behind the business acquisitions and lease agreements. But what if I told you that not even 400 feet away from the Wells Fargo Center, there's a tale of another organization paying a lease to play their home games in a stadium they don't even own. Temple University is paying the Philadelphia Eagles up to $3 million per year so the football team can play their home games there. Temple University does not own a photo album. For those of you that don't know who I am or know anything about me, my name is John. I just completed my first semester of school attending Temple University after taking an 8-year break from college. After I got my associate's degree, I didn't want to go to college anymore, so I joined the Army, did that. Now I'm out of the Army, and now I'm attending Temple. That's a short story. I'm 30 years old, and where I'm at life is a lot different than the majority of undergrad students that are at Temple University. And I don't really care for the college experience, whatever that is. Maybe it's because I've already had my fair share of partying and drinking while still in the Army. So at this point in my life, I just don't care for it. As you could gather from the intro of this video, I am a massive Philadelphia sports fan. Sixers, Phillies, Eagles, Flyers. And I follow all their leagues very closely. Well, maybe not the NHL. I'm not the biggest hockey fan, but I do root for the Flyers unconditionally because they're a Philly team. But NHL, I don't really follow them much. The other three leagues, the NBA, NFL, MLB, I follow them very closely. But there is one other sport that I've been following very closely this season in 2021. College football. The regular season this year has been fantastic. There have been a lot of great upsets and surprises. Jim Harbaugh and Michigan finally overcoming Ohio State and earning a spot in the playoffs. Cincinnati being a non-Power 5 school earning a playoff spot. The mustard bottle from the night Ole Miss beat Tennessee in Knoxville. Kansas upsetting Texas in Austin for the first time ever, and making so many different types of history that night. Now, how did the Temple Owls perform this season? They finished with an underwhelming 3-9 record. They lost 7 straight games to close out the season, and every loss was by at least 20 points. And as a result, their head coach Rod Carey was fired. And as of the moment that I am writing the script for this video, less than 24 hours later, Stan Drayton was announced as the newest head coach at Temple. Hopefully he could turn things around in 2022. Despite last season being a hiccup, for the last 13 seasons, Temple has actually been pretty good. And they qualified for a bowl game in 9 of those seasons and even won their second conference championship in school history in 2016. But historically, they've been terrible. As of the making of this video, the Owls have an all-time record of 474 wins, 586 losses, and 52 ties. With a 45% winning percentage, that is not good. And prior to those stretches of bowl game appearances starting in 2009, Temple only appeared in 2 bowl games. 2 bowl games. The Temple Owls football program has existed for this many seasons and have 2 bowl games to show for it. In the 90s and early 2000s, they were in the Big East Conference, which was an absolute bloodbath for Temple, as they were consistently getting their asses kicked by the likes of Miami and Virginia Tech. Looking at Temple's records, this is where the majority of their losing comes from. During that time, Virginia Tech had Michael Vick, who would revolutionize the quarterback position not only in college but in the NFL with his dual threat ability and athleticism. Quite frankly, Temple had no answer for Vick. And some of those Miami Hurricane teams from that era are some of the greatest college football teams of all time and would go on to play in the national championship game multiple times and a plethora of BCS bowl games and break records with how many players Miami were sending to the NFL. Temple was just not good at football, and they were an afterthought with regards to sports in Philadelphia, which is odd if you think about it. This city bleeds green for the Eagles and will support them no matter how bad they might be. It's also weird because out of every university in Philadelphia that competes in Division I athletics, Temple has the largest student population by a large margin. Temple is also the only university that has a football team that competes in Division I FBS. University of Penn and Villanova compete in Division I FCS. The other schools listed don't even have a football team. And here is the most surprising fact. Temple University does not have their own football stadium. Which finally brings me to the subject of today's video. This is of great interest to me, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to take a deep dive into this and try to make this a fun experience for you guys. I know I had a good time while I was researching this video. Temple University is in a dilemma with regards to their football team's stadium situation. As I mentioned before, Temple has had a recent surge of success, and the football team wants to take that next step to become a legitimate college football program. The university has tried to make the argument that a new stadium on campus would give students a more authentic college experience that would rival any other college across the nation. And it would help the football team if they played in the stadium with a smaller capacity and give a more authentic college football environment, as where the Owls currently play their home games does not reflect that. Even though this talking point wasn't necessarily brought up by the university, this new stadium with fancy facilities could also help with recruiting. That is because they're playing in a half-empty stadium on Saturdays. They don't have a home stadium on campus at the moment, so where do they play their games? Let's leave North Philadelphia and go to South Philadelphia and visit Lincoln Financial Field. Lincoln Financial Field, aka The Link, is home of the NFL's Philadelphia Eagles, who are in charge of the operations, operating costs, and day-to-day management of the system. Okay, let's pump the brakes for a second. You're telling me that Temple is playing in an NFL stadium, and earlier you said that they have difficulty filling the stadium with fans. Yes, let's look at the capacity for Lincoln Financial Field. It has a seating capacity just short of 70,000. More can be allowed in the stadium because many stadiums, to include the Link, have standing room. We're going to look at how the Eagles have performed with regards to attendance first. We're going to look at separate seasons, 2017, 2018, and 2019. I'm not including 2020 and 2021, thanks to half the NFL, to include the Eagles, didn't allow fan attendance during 2020, and for 2021, across the NFL, attendance still hasn't reached the same normalcy of years prior. With that being said, let's look at the Eagles. The Eagles are being ranked at the percentage of the capacity of their stadium is filled, and they are consistently at over 100% and at the top of the NFL year after year. Yep, as I suspected, Philly bleeds green. Now how about the cherry and white? Yeah, that's just not good. This is also 2003's attendance numbers, the first season Temple started playing at the Link. Look, I don't want to harp too much on attendance right now because it's still early, but I'm going to return to it later, I promise. Another question you might be wondering is it common for college football teams to use NFL stadiums for their home games? Yes, it is actually. In fact, out of the 30 stadiums used for NFL home games in 2021, 6 of those stadiums, including the Link, have agreements in place between the NFL and their universities so that college teams could play their home games in those stadiums.
Oh, hey, Miami, how's it going?
But there's a catch. There's always a catch. Remember earlier when I mentioned how the 76ers are currently paying Comcast Spectacor because they don't have an ownership stake in the arena they play in? Temple is doing the same exact thing. In 2003, when a construction for the Link was completed and open to the public, Temple signed a lease agreement with the Eagles for 15 years, allowing them to play their home games at the Link, which Temple paid $15 million upfront, with the lease expiring in 2017. After 2017, Temple had 2 one-year options, which they had exercised so they continue playing at the Link. What I'm about to say is allegedly true from my research, but those one-year options ended up costing the university more money than the $1 million per year average than previous years. That 2-year period took into account inflation, which wasn't an issue with the original $15 million payment in 2003, so the Eagles are trying to make up for the loss. The Eagles managed to pry some extra change out of the university, but
I was a businessman doing business.
Now I'm going to go back to speaking the truth. On game days where Temple Owls take the field, the university will receive 0% revenue from parking and 10% revenue from concessions. From what I understand, Temple is also paying for the security and other miscellaneous game day expenses, which can balloon the cost over the course of the college football season of up to $3 million per year. In February of 2020, Temple signed a new lease agreement with the Eagles for 5 years to continue playing at the Link. After that 5-year agreement, Temple can opt in to continue playing at the Link for 5 more years. But why though? Because the football team needs a place to play? No, I meant like, how did Temple football end up playing in the same stadium as the Eagles? In order to answer that, we need to go back to North Philadelphia and talk about some Philadelphia history.
We traveled all the way back through time to call you.
Here we are at the intersection of North 20th Street and West Lehigh Avenue. The Deliverance Evangelistic Church stands here currently, but that wasn't always the case. Shibe Park, later to be known as Connie Mack Stadium, once stood here. From its opening in 1909, the American League baseball team known as the Philadelphia Athletics played here. Now in the National League, there was another baseball team that played in Philadelphia that was appropriately named the Phillies. In the 1930s, they were playing in the Baker Bowl, which wasn't too far from Shibe Park, and they were growing dissatisfied with it. So the Phillies ownership worked out an agreement with the Athletics owner and longtime manager, Connie Mack, so that the Phillies would become tenants of the Athletics, as long as the Phillies hire their own staff to work home games and pay 10 cents for every fan that attended their games. Now, Connie Mack is a man who deserves an entire video dedicated to him, but I don't have that kind of time. He was a player who turned into a manager and managed the Athletics from 1901 to 1950. In 1950, he was 87 years old, and he was, well, to put it nicely, he was past his prime mentally. There were incidents of him sleeping in the dugout during games and him awakening and calling the names of players who no longer played for his team. His 2 sons pushed for Mack to retire, When this happened, the Mack family made a number of questionable financial decisions. In addition to the team's poor play in the ensuing years, the Athletics' future wasn't looking too bright, and the Mack family's hands were forced to sell the team. Arnold Johnson bought the team and eventually moved the Athletics to Kansas City, Missouri. This team would also be moved again from KC to Oakland, where they currently play. But if you are paying attention to anything said earlier in this video, you know that there's a problem with an existing lease agreement, as the Phillies are still playing in Connie Mack Stadium and were paying rent to the Athletics. After Johnson took over as majority owner, he was in a bind with Phillies owner Bob Carpenter. Carpenter had no interest in buying the stadium, as Connie Mack Stadium needed serious renovations and he was unwilling to pay. Johnson threatened to double the price of rent for the Phillies. In a last-ditch effort, Carpenter formed a company to buy the stadium for $1.7 million so that the Phillies were putting money from one pocket to another. After the purchase was made, Carpenter was having difficulty trying to turn a profit from their stadium, and they were forced to sell the stadium for a lower price than they bought it for. During the Phillies and Athletics' tenures at Connie Mack Stadium, the Philadelphia Eagles played here too. Originally a football team called the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets played here until the 1931 season, when the team became bankrupt and operations stopped. After the Philadelphia Eagles were founded 2 years later in 1933, they eventually landed in Connie Mack Stadium in 1940. Yeah, a baseball team and a football team shared the same stadium. The dimensions of the stadium were clearly meant for baseball, and the stadium had to make adjustments in order to make sure the season was a success. To accommodate football at Shibe Park during the winter, management set up stands in right field parallel to 20th Street. Some 20 feet high, these east stands had 22 rows of seats. The goalposts stood along the first baseline and in left field. The uncovered east stands enlarged capacity of Shibe Park to over 39,000, but the Eagles rarely drew more than 25 to 30,000. This is an old quote. Obviously, as the popularity of football, not only within Philadelphia, but nationwide grew. The Eagles were looking for an alternative place to play, as they were inevitably going to outgrow Connie Mack Stadium. Thus, in 1958, the Eagles moved to Franklin Field on the University of Penn's campus. After the Eagles moved to Franklin Field, the citizens of Philadelphia wanted a new stadium for the Phillies and Eagles. In 1964, the public voted to approve a $25 million bond issue for a new stadium. Because the budget for the new stadium increased, the public had to vote again in 1967 to approve $13 million more going towards the project. In 1971, Veterans Stadium was open to the public.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by, is a better home awaiting in the sky, oh, in the sky.
This holy cathedral is what cemented Philadelphia in sports infamy. The 700 level, which housed the most unhinged of passionate sports fans, a jail entertainment center to contain the unruly, the turf that ended careers. This place had charm and pizzazz. Veterans Stadium was the premier entertainment venue in Philadelphia.
Dying Savior, now they dwell with him above.
This stadium was unique in that it was circular with what is known as an octorad design, so that the stadium configurations can handle both football and baseball. When the Vet was at its respective configurations, it had a capacity of over 65,000 for football and 61,000 for baseball. It was also notorious for having a terrible surface made of AstroTurf, which made life hell for the players. In 1933, Chicago Bears wide receiver Wendell Davis's career was ended after tearing both of his kneecaps after planting both feet and leaping, attempting to catch a pass from his quarterback. Oh, it's Jim Harbaugh. The Vet wasn't a popular place to play for opponents, not only for its playing surface, but also because of the ravenous Philadelphia fanbase. But with the Vet being a premier place for sports with an adequate seating capacity, this would be the dream place to play for an up-and-coming college football team.
I wonder who that could be. Hi.
Though the Vet was opened in 1971, Temple didn't start playing there until 7 years later in 1978. While the Eagles were enjoying a new arena, Temple University administration thought that the football team were playing their games in a stadium which they considered to be substandard and inefficient. Thus, they stopped caring for a facility that they owned. Let's go back to North Philadelphia. No, we are not stopping on campus for this one. We need to go further north. Yeah, there we go. We are at Cheltenham Avenue and Vernon Road at the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. What used to be here was once called Temple Stadium, a 35,000 seat stadium where the Temple Owls played their home games. For almost 50 years, starting in 1928, the football and soccer teams played here. For many years, the stadium was regularly drawing fans. The largest home crowd for a game happened in 1934 when Temple defeated Villanova and 40,000 people witnessed. The following year in 1935, 75,000 plus people came to Temple Stadium on Easter Sunday to hear the gospel of Reverend Ross Stover. There were more people waiting outside of the stadium to get in, but they were denied entry. Not a few, but an extra 20,000. I was unable to find year-to-year attendance records during Temple's tenure in Temple Stadium. Say that 10 times fast. But I'm going to assume that things were going well for the stadium and the university. Remember earlier how I mentioned that the Eagles were growing dissatisfied with Connie Mack Stadium and were looking for a new place to play? Well, Temple Stadium was actually the first place on the Eagles' list. In 1953, the Eagles were interested in purchasing the venue and land from Temple. The Eagles had played a game at Temple Stadium once as part of an emergency situation after they were bumped from their venue due to a high school football game taking precedence. So, wanting this stadium made sense for the Eagles. After Temple got the land and property appraised, it was valued at $1 million, which became Temple's offer to the Eagles. The Eagles declined.
You serious?
Thus taking their talents to University City to play at Franklin Field. According to what I found, after the deal, Temple's football team wasn't drawing the usual crowds. In 1972, the university wanted to make signs that pointed to the direction of the stadium in the West Oak Lane neighborhood. The stadium was over 7 miles from campus and some assistance might be needed for some people, which I can personally understand. This was the 1970s and long before the advent of smartphones. But Cheltenham Township denied the university's request. Frustrated by the dwindling attendance records, Temple made the decision to move their base of operations for the newly constructed Veterans Stadium. But when they moved, it didn't fix the attendance issues. On November 7th, 1980, Temple played the University of Akron at the Vet, in which the Owls won 16-7. But here's the unfortunate part. A grand total of 2,872 people showed up to the game. Head coach Wayne Harden was not a happy camper. He believed that the reason why the university was no longer playing at Temple Stadium was because people could not find it. Okay, let's step back for a second. You want me to believe that a stadium that your football team was using for 50 years and was passed down from student body generation to student body generation was hard to find? Yes, you could make the argument that Cheltenham Township's denying Temple's request for signs had something to do with that, but for 50 years, where the football team had some big games where the stadium was over capacity, and 10 years earlier, one of the most legendary concerts of all time happened at the stadium. On May 16th, 1970, for the only time ever to my knowledge, Jimi Hendrix and Grateful Dead were on the same bill. That and many other events happened here in the past 50 years. I'm just going to disagree with Coach Harden's statement as to why Temple had poor turnouts for their games. I'm actually going to say that this is the university's fault. According to this, it said, because of vandalism and failure to maintain and rebuild deteriorating parts of the stadium, the university stopped using it on a regular basis by the late 1970s. I'll say that vandalism is not necessarily on the fault of the university, but failure to maintain the property that they did have is negligence. Could it have been maintained? Maybe not. I would like to think so. Go to University City. Franklin Field is still standing 127 years later. In my research, I haven't found a definitive answer as to why Temple left to go to Veterans Stadium in the first place, and I don't think I ever will. Coach Harden's statement is the closest thing I've found which should serve as a reason as to why they left. In 2001, Temple sold the land to Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church for $4.5 million. In 2006, this building was constructed and is now a place of worship. The intended purpose of learning history is to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself. Maybe Temple's administration looked to the past and made a calculated analysis and said to themselves, yeah, we definitely fumbled the bag with that one. And maybe they are now looking at the checks they are paying to the Eagles every year and asking themselves, why are we doing this? Then, someone hatches a brilliant idea.
I have an idea.
Really? What is it?
Let's leave!
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go build my own theme park with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the park.
In 2018, Temple University released a proposal to the public about details of a stadium that the college wanted to build on campus. Temple held a presentation with local members of the Northern Philadelphia community along with representatives from the NAACP. In this presentation, they laid down their offer. A 35,000 seat stadium that an estimated $130 million will be needed in order to build it. Let's look at the request. Right now, I'm standing at where midfield is projected to be. The street that I'm standing on is 15th Street, and this would be demolished and all traffic that would normally go south towards Montgomery Avenue would be redirected towards Broad Street. Some might be thinking, wait, you are at midfield, how high is this structure? Actually, not very high. In fact, here's Lincoln Financial Field. That white figure with the red outline is how high Temple Stadium will be. Temple is drawing influence from football stadium at Yale University, which is appropriately named the Yale Bowl. It is built into a raised hill as the silhouette of the stadium is low and exposes itself very little. Many other stadiums across the US adopted this particular style of design. This is important because this is most likely to comply with the zoning codes that Philadelphia has in place for this part of the city, since this is amid a residential area. Now, the top of the stadium will be the same height as the tops of the other homes on the surrounding blocks. A football stadium may seem off amid a residential area, but the height of it should at least match the aesthetic of the nearby buildings. What if I am someone who lives in this neighborhood and doesn't care about football games happening on Saturday afternoons 6 days during a calendar year? I have to listen to all the game day festivities from my home. According to the university, they will be implementing a U-shaped design. Thus, the opening of the U will be oriented south towards Montgomery Avenue and the Aramark Star Complex where the gym is. This is important because it is towards property that Temple already owns, and behind it is the parking structure for the Liacouras Center. Noise can be manipulated and funneled in different ways so that it can go in the direction the builders intended. Engineering and stadium construction have come a long way so that sound can be reoriented. Just like at Quest Field in Seattle, the 12th man is nothing more than a genius feat in engineering that pivots the sound back onto the field. In theory, for 6 days out of the year, this stadium will be used and that's it. Will there be another use for it instead of just a football stadium? I mean, the Liacouras Center where the basketball team plays also has a gym attached to it for the students to use. Will there be something similar for the new stadium? Yes, there will be classrooms along with an academic research center. But which department will have classrooms in the stadium? Will it be the engineering, business, law? No one knows. It isn't specified. The stadium will have commercial shops along the Broad Street portion of the stadium. The stadium with its commercialization and operation would provide jobs for the community. I didn't hit on every single talking point that Temple mentioned during their presentation, but I will put a link to it down in the description for your viewing pleasure. If you're interested in the planning that goes into a stadium and how many different factors are in play with a project like this, then I highly recommend checking out the Pastebin link down in the description with all of my resources. All in all, it seems like a pretty sound project, and the university has their bases covered. They made it explicitly clear that they're not going to be purchasing any property with this proposal, as well as demolishing any property. Well, apart from 15th Street, the stadium is going to be on campus. The university won't have to worry about transporting students from the dormitories to the sports complex with buses, as they have been doing on Saturdays for game days. And because the travel from the dorms and nearby apartments won't feature any vehicular transportation, the possibility of students driving under the influence of alcohol would be very low. Remember when Temple was good in 2015 when they beat Penn State in the beginning of the year and were nationally ranked, and Notre Dame came to Philadelphia to play the Owls? Remember when ESPN's College Game Day came to Philly and the set was on Independence Mall and not on campus? There would be adequate space to have the sort of thing happen if Stan Drayton turns around the football program and Temple becomes nationally ranked again. And the football program. If this stadium is built, then it could influence recruits to come to Temple if they are playing in a state-of-the-art stadium and not a half-empty stadium on game day. This will also stabilize the football program, and some consistency might happen. Who knows? If the team is consistently doing well, then prospective students might come to the university with an entertaining culture of sports. Apart from last season, the basketball team has had a history of being consistently good during the eras of John Chaney and Fran Dunphy. Having a legitimate basketball and football program would certainly be a draw for students and give the university its own distinct culture. Yeah, like I said, this will certainly be a positive thing for the university apart from a few minor complaints on my end like parking. And as a massive sports fan, I think it's dope and could be really awesome for the students. It's a plan that works in theory and could benefit the university. But how does that benefit those in North Philly and those that are not named Temple University? Throughout the city of Philadelphia, gentrification has become a very big problem, which contributes to higher costs and drive up the original population, making living unaffordable to those that have lived in neighborhoods for generations. Okay, for those of you that are not aware of the term gentrification, Google defines it as the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in, improving housing, and attracting new businesses, typically displacing current inhabitants in the process. Let me visualize this for you so that you have an idea of what I'm talking about. This is on Broad Street, only a couple blocks near campus, right near the Sunoco gas station on Broad and Thompson. Notice how the aesthetic of the row home situated in the middle doesn't fit the aesthetic of the two buildings that act as slices of bread in a sandwich. The building on the left is an apartment building, and the taller building on the right is an apartment building as well. I don't know if you can tell this from the video, but the row homes in the center are vacant and unoccupied. This is happening all over Philadelphia. Would a $130 million stadium contribute to the gentrification of neighborhoods of North Philly? Would this stadium make living unaffordable as residents are living next to an attraction? Now, it is important to mention this because this thought might be going through some of your minds. Why does the construction of a stadium in this part of Philadelphia contribute to gentrification, whereas the 3-stadium complex in South Philadelphia doesn't? The sports complex, in my mind, is the perfect place for its commercialization and isolation from the rest of Philadelphia. The sports complex is fairly easy to get to. It's easy accessible from I-95 and I-76 and the Walt Whitman Bridge carrying over traffic from New Jersey, and it's even easily accessible via public transportation with the Broad Street subway. That's what I took in the beginning of this video when I went to the Sixers game. And with more than enough parking, it won't have carryover into the nearest neighborhoods. Also, with Xfinity Live, hotels, and a casino nearby, this section of Philadelphia was made for it, without disrupting any neighborhoods whenever any new addition is being made. As a result of the gentrification throughout Philadelphia, people are displaced due to being unable to meet with the economic demands of their changing neighborhood. It's rough out there. When times get rough and people cannot afford the necessities to live, some turn to crime and drugs. In 2020, the amount of homicides reached 499 in Philadelphia. That is the highest total since 1990, 30 years ago. In response to the high number of shootings in November 2021, Temple University upped their police activity and surveillance following the death of a student. Out of every university in the United States, Temple has the largest university police force. Some people weren't a fan of it. At that time, we were a year and a half removed from someone losing his life needlessly. Some students didn't like this authority only gaining more power. I need to stop myself and make myself
Loud and clear.
I am in no way blaming Temple or saying that the university is directly responsible for the death of a student, the other homicides in North Philadelphia, or even the gentrification. I am looking at the aforementioned points sociologically. The homicides and gentrification are independent of Temple, since this is not only a Philadelphia problem, but also a nationwide problem. But I'm going to shift gears for a second and talk about this whole ordeal economically. Whenever products are built in a community, more specifically youth sports recreation facilities, they are built with the intention of serving the local community out of necessity and not to turn a profit. If anything, a recreation facility would operate at a neutral level due to the maintenance of a playing field or court. A youth sports facility would not make the same amount of money as a professional or a college sports stadium would. The construction of a stadium, or even renovating a youth sports facility or installing an artificial turf field, would require cities and towns to change their plans and reallocate funds and even borrow money to facilitate the respective project. The funds that are borrowed may come from the state capital. If I didn't care at all about sports and didn't care that the Braves won the World Series last season, wouldn't there be skepticism if my tax dollars were going to fund the new stadium that was opened 5 years ago? That's why there's so much discourse over professional sports team owners pushing for new stadiums in their cities. There are fans that genuinely want a new stadium so that their favorite teams can stay, but they won't because of incompetent franchise owners. Just ask a San Diego Chargers fan how they feel about Dean Spanos. But when it comes to universities, that's a whole different story. There are some slight differences. There are alumni who are extremely generous and want to give back to the alma mater that shaped them into the people they became. Over the course of his life, T. Boone Pickens has given over $1 billion to Oklahoma State University and $265 million to the athletic program. In response, the university named their football stadium after him. Unfortunately, not every school has a T. Boone Pickens who can solve a conundrum with a monetary donation. Without getting too in depth with the specifics of how much money is spent on college athletics each year, just know that it is an absurd amount of money. I highly recommend going to the Knight Commission database and play around with the various schools and see how much money was spent on athletic programs on a year-to-year basis. I learned that the University of Alabama just spent north of $180 million in 2019 alone on the athletic department, which is 3 times more than the median of every school in Division I FBS. From 2009 to 2013, Division I FBS schools are paying on average over $69,000 in yearly debt per year in obligations to their athletic programs. Every year, universities across the nation have to pay more than $500 million to pay down athletic-related debt. Due to inflation, the total debt has ballooned to $7.7 billion. If the revenue from ticket sales, merchandise, fundraisings, and philanthropy from a university's version of T. Boone Pickens doesn't cover the bill, then the students and general public foot the bills due to misreporting of financial information. This will come in the form of higher student fees, tuition, and taxes. I'm going to take you on a field trip to Akron, Ohio. Sorry to disappoint, but LeBron won't be there when we go. The University of Akron had plans of their own to create their own stadium. They used to play here at the Rubber Bowl, which still hasn't been completely demolished due to the implication that it would damage the nearby highway. So this albatross is still standing as a testament of what is to come for Akron. A new stadium was built in 2009. The Infocation, oh god, I'm probably mispronouncing that. Stadium, Summer Field. Why are there so many names? What? But some things had to happen in order for the $62 million dream to become a reality. Student dormitory buildings were demolished while students were actively using them for residence. Students were displaced and put into a local hotel, which was transformed from an old Quaker Oats Company silo that the university had to purchase for $22 million. If the university demolished dorm buildings in favor of building a football stadium, then surely they saw a return on their investment, right? In 2014, 5 years after the stadium opened, Akron had the lowest attendance numbers of any school in Division I FBS. They had the lowest average and the lowest total number of people who attended home games for that season. The amount of home games varied per season for each team. Akron had 6 games, and there were schools that had 5, 6, and 7. Even the schools who had 5 home games like West Point, the Naval Academy, and San Jose State still outperformed Akron in the total attendance for the season. Because of the low attendance numbers in the year prior, in 2013, Akron had to deal with more than $73 million in debt for its athletic programs. As you can see from this chart, once the stadium was completed in 2009, the total debt increased exponentially by $70 million in the next year. Operating with debt has pretty much become a normality at this point, but it led to Akron laying off faculty members and higher tuition fees for students. Because a large portion of the money is tied up into this project and it still needs to be paid off, it hampers the university's ability to borrow money and take out loans for other endeavors in academic research that could benefit the institution greatly. Should Temple pursue the construction of a new stadium? This is something to greatly consider. The intentions are always pure and beneficial for all parties involved when coming up with ideas on how to improve current conditions, and the benefits always sound fantastic. The quality of entertainment would improve, alumni and student satisfaction would improve with campus life, the football coaches and team would be satisfied. It makes money. Who knows? Every situation is different. A football team that for many years has been eager to take the next step and become a powerhouse in the college football world. For many years, Temple was reduced to nothing more than a mere punching bag for dominant programs to gang up on. This past season, Cincinnati beat the shit out of Temple 52-3 en route to a fantastic season and finishing number 4 in the nation and earning a berth in the college football playoffs. Temple and Cincinnati both compete in the American Athletic Conference. Despite the conference not being in the Power 5, Cincinnati made it happen and made the playoffs. Should Temple play their asses off for an entire season and go undefeated, they could also be playing against Alabama in the playoffs and gain notoriety and ensure the popularity and success of their football program for many years to come. But could that be Temple? Temple has been good in recent memory, and they might have the talent to do it should they land a few studs in recruiting and get more size on their offensive line. Temple has been well coached in recent memory, minus Rod Carey's 2021 disaster campaign. But there has been a trade-off to the recent success that Temple has had. Temple has never been a winning school historically, as mentioned earlier, and their reputation as a legitimate program with consistent winning has always had difficulty coming to fruition. I have a personal theory as to why. There will always be better colleges and better opportunities up for grabs with more money being offered to coaches. Why stay at Temple after the success that you have had when Baylor has a historically better program, better recruits, better facilities, better money being paid to you? And if you turn around this college for a second time, it could serve as a stepping stone for an opportunity in the NFL. Al Golden left Temple to go coach at Miami after appearing in a bowl game. Steve Adazio left Temple to go to Boston College after winning a bowl game. Jeff Collins left Temple to go coach at Georgia Tech after earning a bowl appearance. Are you sensing a pattern here? If history is telling us anything, there may be a possibility that Stan Drayton may not be here for long if a greater opportunity arises if Temple had success during his tenure here, thus continuing the cycle of coaches that Temple has produced in the past 13 seasons. If a stadium is produced, we could be going to the beat of a different drum. Temple has an opportunity to resecure the photo album they had lost to a short-sighted administration from generations ago. Their players could create their own memories, along with many other students who attend this university. But should all of this even happen when the issues of gentrification is still prevalent within Philadelphia? With the possibility that a good football product is put onto the field, and with the commercialization associated with the stadium, it could generate a lot of revenue and provide jobs for the local community. But with student loans and tuition fees reaching an all-time high every single year, should this project be set into motion? That stadium proposal I mentioned was presented in 2018, and now, 4 years later in 2022, from what I researched, it still hasn't been submitted to the city of Philadelphia. Will Temple University ever get around to submitting it? If the Eagles end up shafting Temple in the coming years, then we shouldn't be surprised if these talks pick up again. Until that time comes, take it easy, and thanks for watching.